thought I'd been hired to guard a school. I know better now. I wasn't guarding anything. I was being kept close enough to count, but not close enough to be noticed. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole story. And it took me almost 5 months and one very bad night to understand it. The rules were simple. They were printed in a binder they mailed me, in flat grey type, like the instructions on a fire extinguisher. Do not enter the building before midnight. Walk the same route every night in the same order with no deviation. Do not remain in any one place for more than 4 minutes. And its own line, its own small paragraph, as if whoever wrote it wanted it to look like nothing. Do not sit down inside the building. I thought those were security rules. Don't slack off. Don't nap on shift. Don't trip in the dark and sue us. That's what I told myself for 4 months, while I walked my route and collected a paycheck that was almost double what the work was worth, and didn't ask the questions a smarter or less tired man would have asked on the first night. They weren't security rules. They were enrollment rules. I only understood that the night I found my own name on the attendance list, typed neat at the bottom of a column of children I'd never heard of, in a school that had been closed and fenced and forgotten for 20 years. By then it was almost too late to matter. Some nights I'm still not sure it isn't. Let me tell it the way it happened so you can decide for yourself whether I'm a reliable man. I think that part matters. I think you should be able to weigh me. The school had been closed for 20 years and they were paying me almost double to sit outside it at night. That was the part I couldn't get past, even at the very start, before any of the rest of it. You don't pay double for an empty building. Nobody breaks into a sealed-up elementary school in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing to take. There's no copper worth stripping in a place like that. No equipment, no foot traffic, no drunks wandering off the highway, because there's no highway. I'd done 11 years of security by the time that listing crossed my screen, and I knew to the dollar what an easy site was worth, and this was the easiest site I'd ever seen, paying like one of the hard ones, the kind with a loading dock and a night crew and somebody important's name on the lease. I told myself there was a boring reason. There's almost always a boring reason. A grant that had to be spent. A liability clause some lawyer wrote into a settlement. A rich family that didn't notice or didn't care that they were overpaying. I just couldn't land on which boring reason it was, and in the end I stopped trying because I was 46 and tired and behind on things, and the money covered the car payment with room left over. When you're behind on things, you get good at not looking too hard at the gift in front of you. I should tell you why I was behind, because it's part of how they had me. The divorce had been 3 years earlier, and it had been the cheap kind in every way except the way that counts. We didn't fight over money because there wasn't much to fight over. What it took was the structure. When you're married, even badly, somebody else is holding half the weight of being a person, the appointments, the second income, the sense that the day has edges. When that goes, you find out fast how much you'd been leaning. I'd bounced through 3 security jobs in those 3 years, not because I was bad at the work, but because the work was bad. Mall lots where teenagers keyed cars, a distribution warehouse where the supervisor wanted me to also drive a forklift I wasn't certified for, a hospital parking structure where I once held a man's hand for 40 minutes while we waited for an ambulance that was already on site 3 floors up, lost. I was good at the job. I was just done with people, and the listing promised a job with no people in it. Single site, closed building, minimal foot traffic, overnight only. To a man like me, in the state I was in, it read like a prayer somebody had answered before I'd finished praying it. The company was called Hadley Brennan Site Services. I looked them up, the way you do. There was a website, the kind that looks like 100 other websites, stock photo of a man in a tie shaking hands with another man in a tie, a paragraph about comprehensive custodial and security solutions for properties in transition, a contact form, no phone number, no address beyond a P.O. box in a town I'd never heard of 2 states over, no reviews, no social media, no employees listed. It didn't alarm me. Half the contracting outfits in this business are 2 guys and a filing cabinet, and the ones that win the strange government and estate contracts are exactly the kind that don't advertise. I want to be honest about that too. Nothing about Hadley Brennan looked wrong. It looked unremarkable, which is a different thing, and which I've come to believe is much worse. The man who interviewed me did it over the phone, and it took about 9 minutes. He had a flat voice, not cold exactly, but worn smooth, the way a stone in a river goes smooth, The way a man's voice goes when he has said the same sentences so many times that the meaning has rubbed off them and only the shape is left. He never gave me his name. I asked once near the end and he said, "You can reach the office through the line on your card," which isn't a name, and I let it go because I was already mentally spending the money. He told me the site was a decommissioned elementary school closed for around 20 years and that the property was tied up in what he called a long-running estate matter. That was the phrase, estate matter. He used it the way you'd use a phrase you'd been told to use. He said the owners, he never said who the owners were, and when I asked, he simply moved to the next sentence as if I hadn't spoken. The owners were required, under the terms of an agreement he didn't describe, to maintain a continuous physical presence on the grounds. Continuous. That word came up more than once. Continuous physical presence. It struck me even then as a strange way to describe a security guard. You don't usually hire a man to be a presence. You hire him to watch, to deter, to respond. This man kept talking about being there as though being there were the entire point, and watching were just the cover story for it. "So I just have to be there," I said, to make sure I understood. "You have to be present and you have to be awake," he said. "The presence is the job. Everything else is paperwork." I asked what I'd be guarding against, and he paused. The pause was a little longer than the question deserved, not a thinking pause, more like a man deciding which of two prepared answers to give. "Vandals," he said finally. "Insurance liability, the usual. People always say in stories like this that they should have heard something in a pause like that. I didn't. At the time, it's just quiet on a phone line and you're doing the math and the math works and you say yes." I said yes. He said the materials would arrive in 2 days, and they did. There were 3 things in the package. A key, brass, heavy, old-fashioned, the kind they don't cut anymore. A binder, which I'll get to because the binder is the thing I keep coming back to, and a lanyard with a laminated badge clipped to it. The badge had my name on it, my date of hire, and a photograph of my face. I need you to sit with that the way I didn't. I never sent them a photo. There had been no application with a headshot, no in-person interview, no office I visited, no camera anywhere in the 9 minutes I spent on the phone with a man whose name I didn't get. And yet here was a badge, professionally made, laminated, with a recent photograph of me on it. Not an old DMV shot, not something scraped off a former employer's website, because I checked later, and none of them had used a photo like this one. In the picture, I was wearing a grey Henley I owned and wore often, and I was standing against a wall, pale, scuffed, a baseboard at the bottom of the frame that I did not recognize and have never been able to place. I am not in that photograph in any moment I remember. I have turned it over in my mind 1,000 times and I cannot find the day it was taken. I'd love to tell you I called them and demanded an explanation. I didn't. I held it under the kitchen light and turned it a few times, and I built myself an explanation instead, because that's what I do. That's the kind of man I am. I am an explainer away of things. They pulled it off something, I decided. A profile I'd forgotten. A photo a friend tagged. There are 100 pictures of all of us loose in the world now. You don't get to keep track of them. I clipped the badge to the lanyard and I hung the lanyard on the hook by my door, and I did not think about it again for 4 months. I'm telling you about it now, this early, because I want you to be thinking about it the whole way through. I wasn't. That was the first of my mistakes, and it was the kind of mistake that doesn't feel like one, which are the only mistakes that ever really cost you anything. The binder was the strange one, 1.5 inches thick, 3 rings, maybe 90 pages, and every page of it was procedure. For an empty building, there were 90 pages of instructions about exactly how a night was supposed to go in a place where, supposedly, nothing happened and no one came. It was written in that same flat, smoothed-down voice the man on the phone had, numbered and cross-referenced and dry as a tax form, and I understand now that the dryness was the point. Whoever wrote that binder wanted it very badly to read like nothing. They buried the things that mattered in the middle of the things that didn't, the way you'd hide a single live wire in a coil of dead ones. Most of it I forgot the day I read it. Check-in procedure, logging procedure, what to do about weather, what to do if the gate wouldn't latch, mileage reimbursement of all things for a job where you parked once and stayed. But 4 of the rules I will remember until the day I die, and 3 of them were grouped together under a heading that said simply, interior conduct. Do not enter the building before midnight. Walk the patrol route in the order specified identically each circuit without deviation. Do not remain in any single interior location for more than 4 minutes. Keep the patrol continuous. Do not sit or rest while inside the building. I read them the way you read the laminated safety card in the seat back pocket of an airplane. With your eyes, not your mind. Don't slack, don't nap, don't find a warm room and settle in. Lawyer talk. Liability boilerplate, written by someone in an office who'd never set foot on the property and was just imagining the laziest possible guard and ruling him out in advance. That is genuinely completely what I believed. It would be a long time, months, before I understood that the binder was not a list of tasks at all. It was a list of conditions under which a living person could be inside that school without the school noticing he was there. My first shift was a Tuesday in October. The drive out was 40 minutes from my apartment, and the last 12 of those minutes were on a county road with no streetlights, no center line worth the name, just 2 lanes of patched asphalt running through dark farmland toward darker hills. On a road like that, at night, a building doesn't appear the way it would in daylight, growing slowly on the horizon. It arrives all at once. 1 second, there's nothing but the cone of your headlights, and the next, the school is simply there. A darker mass against the dark 3 stories of brown brick, flat-roofed institutional, with a flagpole out front that had no flag, and I noticed no rope to raise one. The rope was gone. The cleat at the bottom of the pole was gone, just a bare aluminum mast pointing up at nothing. The parking lot was the size of a city block, and it was completely empty. I don't just mean there were no cars, I mean it had the emptiness of a place that had given up on cars entirely. The painted lines had faded to grey suggestions you could only see if you already knew they were there. Weeds came up thick through the seams in the blacktop, dead and brown now in October, rustling when the wind moved. And at the far end of all that cracked emptiness sat the school, every window dark, waiting in the patient way that big empty buildings wait. The guard cabin was down by the gate, a prefab shack like the ones at construction sites, fiberglass walls, a space heater, a metal desk, a landline phone, and a bracket on the wall holding 4 small monitors. 3 of the 4 monitors were dead, not snowy, not flickering dead, black, no signal at all. The 4th showed the front doors of the school from a high angle, grainy and washed out in the grey on grey of cheap night vision. I would stare at that one feed across 140 nights, and I could draw it from memory right now. The double doors, the 4 concrete steps, the steel handrail with a bend in it about 1/3 of the way up, where somebody sometime had backed a vehicle into it and nobody had ever straightened it. 3 of the 4 cameras were dead. I noted it, the way you note a burned-out bulb, and I made a mental list to mention it to the office, and I never did, and it never mattered, because they always knew, every single time, exactly what I did inside that building. I just didn't understand yet how a company with 3 dead cameras could know anything at all. That's the thing I'd warn you to hold on to. The dead cameras were not a malfunction. They were the truth of the place, telling me plainly that whatever watched me in there was not watching through glass and wire. The binder said the first thing I did each night before anything else was call a number to confirm my arrival. The number was printed on a card taped to the desk, the laminate peeling at one corner from however many guards had touched it before me. I dialed. It rang twice, and a recorded voice, not the man who'd hired me, a woman older with the particular over-careful enunciation of a recording made decades ago, said, "Site is acknowledged. Maintain presence. Thank you." Then a tone, then nothing. There was no option to speak, no prompt, no menu, no way to leave a message. It was a recording, plainly, a loop, a machine built to make you feel as though you had checked in with a person. I want to be clear that on the first night I was certain it was a recording, completely certain, and that my certainty eroded slowly across the months that followed, until by the end I was no longer sure at all. Because a recording says the same thing every time, and there were nights later when it said the same words but in a different order of warmth, when the thank you came a half-second too late, as if someone were waiting to see whether I'd say anything first. But that's later. On the first night, it was a recording, and I hung up, and I sat in the warm little box at the edge of all that empty asphalt, and I waited for midnight, because the binder said the first walk was at midnight, and not before, and I told myself one more time that there was a boring reason for all of it. There wasn't. At midnight, I unlocked the front doors with the heavy brass key and went inside for the first time. And the thing that got me, the thing I genuinely was not braced for, was the smell. 20 years closed, sealed, fenced, and it still smelled exactly like every school I have ever walked into in my life. Floor wax, old paper, pencil shavings, and underneath all of it something mineral and faintly damp like wet chalk, like the inside of a box of crayons left in the sun. A smell has no business surviving 20 years in a dead building. Smells are made by things happening by feet on wax, by paper being handled, by bodies breathing in rooms. A smell like that means something is still going on. I didn't think that first night. I just breathed it in and felt, absurdly, a flicker of something almost like comfort, a body memory of being small. That was the second thing the place did to me, after the comfort of the cabin. It made me feel for half a second like I belonged there. The power was on, which surprised me. Not full power, the main fluorescent banks were dead or stripped out of most rooms, but the emergency lighting ran on its own circuits, casting pools of dim yellow at regular intervals down the halls. Just enough to see by. Just enough, I'd think later, to make the dark between the pools feel deliberate, as though the building itself had decided where I was permitted to look and where I wasn't. The route the binder gave me was exact. North Hall first, then through to the gymnasium at the east end, then back across to the cafeteria at the west, then up the east stairwell, across the second floor, down the west stairwell, and around again, a figure eight that took about 35 minutes at a normal walking pace. I followed it precisely because I'm the kind of man who follows printed instructions precisely, and I checked door handles that didn't need checking, and I shone my flashlight into classrooms that had been stripped down to bare floor and chalkboard, and I initialed the little boxes on the clipboard the binder provided, because the job was to be present and the paperwork was how you proved presence. I want to be honest about that first walk. I did not feel dread. I felt mildly ridiculous. A grown man performing a careful security patrol of a building with nothing left in it to secure. It did not once occur to me to wonder why a route through an empty building had to be walked in an exact order, identically, every time. It did not occur to me to wonder who had walked that route enough times and learned it well enough to map it down to which stairwell you took up and which you took down. You don't ask those questions your first night. You just walk where you're told. You walk the path that has already been walked for you. There was one wrong detail that first night, but it was so small that I logged it and forgot it inside an hour. In the cafeteria, on the cinder block wall above where the serving line used to be, there was a corkboard, the kind every school cafeteria in America has, for the week's menu, and the lost and found notices and the reminder about picture day. And there was still a single sheet of paper thumbtacked to it, at all four corners, and printed on the sheet in large, friendly, rounded letters was a lunch menu. Monday, chicken and rice. Tuesday, spaghetti. Wednesday, fish sticks. Thursday and Friday on down below. I remember thinking, somebody forgot to take that down. 20 years, and in all the emptying and closing and fencing, nobody ever pulled the lunch menu off the cafeteria wall. There was something almost sweet about it, almost sad, this little leftover of ordinary life. I even smiled at it. I wrote in my log, cafeteria old lunch menu still posted on board, otherwise clear. And I moved on, and the smile is the part I think about now. I smiled at it. It was 3 weeks before I noticed the menu had changed. I need to walk you through exactly how I noticed, because the noticing is the whole story. It wasn't a figure standing at the serving line. It wasn't a face in a window, or a sound I could record. Nothing in this story is ever the thing you'd put in a movie. It was slower and stupider and more domestic than that, the way real wrong things always are. By the third week, I'd settled into the rhythm of the job. 4 nights a week, 11 to 7. I'd bring a thermos of coffee and a paperback and a sandwich in a paper bag. The midnight walk, the 2 a.m. walk, the 4 a.m., the 6 a.m. The binder wanted 4 patrols, evenly spaced. And in the long gaps between them, I'd sit in the cabin and read and listen to the space heater tick and watch the one live feed of the front doors. It was, with no exaggeration, the easiest job I had ever held. I was sleeping better in the daytime than I had in years. The structure I'd lost in the divorce, the edges to the day, the job gave them back to me. Drive out, check in, walk, sit, drive home, sleep. I had stopped feeling ridiculous. I had stopped feeling much of anything at all, which I'd warn you about if I could warn you about anything. The comfort is the first part of it. The comfort is how it gets your guard down without ever having to come near you. So I was relaxed. I wasn't watching for anything. And on a Thursday in early November, I came around to the cafeteria board on the midnight walk, and the menu said, Monday, chicken and rice. Tuesday, spaghetti. Wednesday, meatloaf, not fish sticks. I stood there with that specific stupid feeling you get when your memory and the world in front of you don't line up, and your brain, being a sensible organ, assumes that the memory is the part that's broken. My first thought was, I misremembered. Of course I did. Who memorizes a lunch menu? I'd glanced at it once, 3 weeks back. Fish sticks, meatloaf, what's the difference? It's a list of cafeteria food, and my tired brain had filled an old blank with the wrong word. That's the obvious explanation, and I am, as I keep telling you, an obvious explanation man. So I took it. I would have kept it too, if not for one thing. I'd written it down. I went back to the cabin and dug through the carbon copies of my old log sheets, the duplicates the binder required me to keep, and there it was in my own handwriting, dated the first Tuesday in October. Cafeteria old lunch menu still posted, fish sticks Wednesday. I'd even noted the day. Wednesday had been fish sticks. It was meatloaf now, on the same board, in the same friendly rounded type. And here's the conclusion I reached, and I tell you this so you understand exactly the kind of man I was being. I decided I'd written it down wrong the first time. That on that first night I'd looked at meatloaf and somehow set down fish sticks, tired, the words swapping in my head the way words do at 2 in the morning. That was more likely, wasn't it? Than a menu rewriting itself in a building no human being had entered in 20 years. So I quietly corrected the story in my own mind. The menu had always said meatloaf. I had made a logging error. Case effectively closed. That held me for about a week. But I'm also a man who, once a discrepancy gets into him, cannot leave it alone. It's the same instinct that makes me good at the job and bad at peace. So I started copying the whole menu down every night, all 5 days, word for word, dated and initialed on the back of the log sheet. Not because I believed anything, because the only way to kill the itch in my head was to build a record I could not argue myself out of. For 4 nights it didn't move. Chicken and rice, spaghetti, meatloaf, tacos, pizza, Monday through Friday, stable, 4 nights running. I started to feel foolish, and I was glad to feel foolish because foolish is a much better thing to be than the alternative. Good, I thought. It's stable. It was a logging error after all. I'm a tired man who saw fish sticks where there was meatloaf, and that's all this ever was. On the 5th night, Tuesday was no longer spaghetti. Tuesday was turkey and gravy. And here is the detail that put a cold weight low in my stomach and would not come out, the one thing I could not talk my way around, the thing that ended the version of me who could still explain this away. The paper had not changed. It was the same sheet of paper, the same 4 thumbtacks in the same 4 holes, the same slight curl at the bottom right corner, and the same faint coffee-colored stain near the top edge that I had been using without ever deciding to, as a landmark, a way of knowing I was looking at the same page night after night. One sheet of paper posted once, decades ago, and the words printed on it were different from the words that had been printed on it 5 nights before. There was no printer in that building. There was no person in that building. And there was no possibility, none, that I had misremembered, because I had it in my own dated handwriting. 2 columns side by side, last week and this week. Spaghetti and turkey and gravy. I keep wanting to call it haunted when I tell this, but haunted is the wrong word, and the wrongness of it is important, so let me be exact. Haunted means something was left behind, a residue, an echo, a dead thing that doesn't know it's dead, repeating its last bad moment in a loop. This was not that. This was not an echo. The menu was current. It had advanced by exactly 1 week in correct order to the meal that would sensibly come next. It wasn't repeating the past. It was keeping up with a present that no longer existed anywhere but inside that building. And that, once I let myself look straight at it, was the thing that frightened me far more than any ghost could have. Not that the school was strange, that the school was correct, that it was on schedule, that somewhere in there a calendar was turning and it was turning to the right page. I didn't do anything dramatic. There was nothing dramatic to do. I read the menu maybe 10 times, and then I finished my patrol, because the patrol was the job, and then I sat in the cabin until 7 a.m. with my book open to a page I never turned. When the sky went grey, I drove home, and I sat in my car in the apartment lot and rehearsed the phone call I knew I should make. There's a menu in the cafeteria, and it changes on its own. The food updates every week. Hear how that sounds, out loud, in a daytime voice. There was no version of that call that didn't end with me sounding like a man who shouldn't be left alone in a building overnight. And I needed the money. I needed the structure. I needed the edges of my day. So I did the thing that, looking back, was the real mistake, worse than ignoring the badge, worse than walking the route without question. I decided I would understand it. I told myself I would be more careful, more observant, a better witness. And I've come to believe that the decision to understand a thing like that is exactly how it gets you. The people who walk away clean are the ones who never try to understand it at all. They feel the wrongness and they leave and they don't look back and they get to keep their lives. I was not going to be one of those people. I was going to be smart about it. I was going to figure it out. So I started paying attention to everything the way I should have from the very first night. The first thing I noticed once I was actually looking was the dust. There wasn't enough of it. A building sealed for 20 years should be a tomb of dust, the kind that lies inches thick on every flat surface, that graze your sleeves when you brush a wall, that hangs in your flashlight beam and makes you cough. And in most of the school, that's exactly what it was. The stripped classrooms had it thick. The old front office had it heaped on the windowsills and the empty shelves, soft and grey as ash. But the route, my route, the exact figure 8 the binder laid out was clean, not spotless, lightly, evenly clean, the way a hallway looks in a house where somebody runs a dust mop down it every couple of weeks without much care. At first I assumed I was doing it myself, that my own passage was keeping the path clear. But that's not how dust works, and I know how dust works, because I've spent a career walking empty buildings at night. When you walk through dust, you don't clean it, you disturb it. You track it. You leave prints and smears and a churned trail behind you that tells anyone who comes later exactly where you went. And there were no prints, not mine, not anyone's. The path wasn't disturbed, it was maintained, lightly, evenly, smoothly clean, as though something passed along it on a regular schedule, gliding without feet, keeping it tidy the way you'd keep tidy a place you used every day. And here's the part it took me much longer to assemble, and longer still to want to. The route I'd been walking, the clean route, the lit route, the one the binder insisted on, ran along the edges of the building. The perimeter halls, the service corridor behind the kitchen, the narrow back passage along the rear of the gymnasium. It never once cut through the center of anything. It skirted the wide main hall where the classes would have lined up for assemblies. It hugged the wall of the cafeteria and never crossed the open middle of it. It used the cramped end stairwells and never the broad central stair. The binder had me walking every single night through exactly the parts of the school that a school full of children never uses, the staff arteries, the service paths. The route you take through a building when you don't want to get in anyone's way, when you want to do your work and not be seen and not interrupt the day that's happening all around you. The second thing was the chairs. There was one classroom on the second floor, room 214, that still had furniture in it, when nearly every other room had been stripped down to bare floor. A dozen of those small molded plastic chairs, the kind that come in primary colors and stack, plus 4 or 5 low tables. And the chairs were arranged, not stacked in a corner, not shoved against the wall the way you leave furniture in a room you're closing forever. They were set out in a loose semicircle facing the front of the room, facing the chalkboard and the spot where a teacher's desk would stand, arranged the way you arrange a class to gather for a story or a lesson or the morning's first roll call. The first night I saw it, I logged it without a flicker. 214, furniture present, arranged. Somebody set it up like that 20 years ago, I figured, and never came back to put it away. But over the following weeks, the semicircle got tidier. I'd swear to this on anything you put in front of me. The chairs that sat a little out of true edged into line. The gap on the left side of the arc where the curve had been broken closed up and evened out, and then one night I counted 11 chairs, where I was nearly sure there'd been 10, and the next patrol I counted 12. and I went back to my logs and found I had written 11, clearly dated twice. So I added the chairs to the things I counted every night the way I'd added the menu: 11, 12, 12, 13, 14. The number climbed, more chairs than there had been when I started the job, appearing in a sealed and fenced building, arriving from somewhere I could not begin to guess at. And with every chair the arc grew neater, the spacing more even, more deliberate, more correct, until there was no mistaking what I was looking at when I stood in the doorway of 214 with my flashlight. It was a room being set up, prepared. A classroom getting ready for a class that was still a few students short of full, and getting closer to full, one chair at a time. That was the night the binder stopped being lawyer talk to me and turned into something else entirely. I sat in the cabin before dawn and I read it again, all 90 pages, slowly, and this time the rules I'd skimmed past stood up off the page and looked at me. Do not enter before midnight. Why midnight of all the arbitrary hours? Unless something happened in that building before midnight that you were not supposed to walk in on unless the day in there ran late, and you had to wait for it to be over, for the building to be finished, before it was safe to step inside. Walk the same route, identically, without deviation. Of course you walk the same path every night. You stay on the marked trail. You don't wander off into the parts of the building that are in use. And the one I'd read a dozen times as anti-laziness boilerplate: do not remain in any single location for more than 4 minutes. You don't put a number that specific on a piece of boilerplate. Boilerplate says do not loiter. Boilerplate says remain alert and mobile. It does not say 4 minutes. A number like 4 minutes is not a policy. It's a measurement. It's a finding. Somewhere at some point someone had timed it, had stood still in a room in that school and counted, and had learned that 4 minutes was the line, the edge of how long a living person could occupy that space before something in the building stopped overlooking him and started instead to account for him. The whole binder, all 90 dry grey pages of it, was not a list of tasks. It was a set of conditions for being inside that school without being noticed by it. Stay on the staff path. Keep moving, always. Don't linger anywhere. Don't arrive before the day in there is done. The rules weren't security procedure. They were dive tables. They were the calm, flat placard you bolt to the wall beside a machine that will take your arm if you reach in at the wrong moment, written in deliberately unalarming language by people who had learned every single line of it the hard way, who knew that if they told you the truth you'd quit, and if they made it boring enough you'd stay, and staying was the job. My continuous physical presence kept the contract alive, kept some old estate matter ticking over, kept somebody somewhere in compliance with something I will never know the shape of. And the rules kept the presence survivable. I should have just walked the route and taken the money. That is exactly what the binder was engineered to make me do. And I am certain now that almost every guard who held this post before me did precisely that. Walked their figure 8 along the lit edges of the building 4 times a night, year after year, never once standing still long enough in any one room to find out why they weren't allowed to. Collected their double pay, felt the comfort, never understood, and were never harmed because understanding was the only thing that could harm them. The not knowing was the safety. The binder was practically begging me not to know. I tested it anyway. I'm not proud of it. I tell you that plainly because I owe you that much. I had every piece of information a man could need to simply leave it alone. And instead, I went up to the second floor on the 2 a.m. walk and I stepped into room 214 and I did not leave at 4 minutes. I stood against the wall just inside the door where I could see the whole arc of small chairs laid out in the dim yellow emergency light. And I held my flashlight down at my side and I watched the second hand on my watch, and I waited. For the first stretch, nothing. The room was only the room, the chairs in their neat half-circle, the thin, even dust on the floor, the cold radiator under the windows, my own breathing, too loud in my ears, and the small clicks and settling sighs an old building makes as it cools in the night. 4 minutes came and went, and I made myself stay, and my heart was going hard, and still nothing happened, and a part of me started to feel foolish all over again, started to think, see, it's nothing, it's an empty room, you've spooked yourself over AI at around the 6-minute mark, The temperature dropped, not sharply, not a horror movie plunge, just a cooling, even and gradual. The way a room cools when someone opens a door at the far end of a hall and the outside air begins to move through. The kind of draft you feel on your ankles first, except no door had opened. The windows were painted shut. There was nowhere for the air to be coming from, and it kept coming, and it kept getting colder, and I stood very still against the wall and watched my breath start to show, faintly, in the beam of light at my side. At around 8 minutes, I began to hear it. The sound was so utterly ordinary that it took me a full several seconds to understand how wrong it was. It was children. Not screaming, nothing from a nightmare, nothing shrieking. It was the soft, layered, overlapping murmur of a great many small voices. The exact sound a full classroom makes heard through a closed door. That wash of talk where you can't pick out any single word, with the occasional higher note lifting up over the top of it, a laugh, a question, a small voice saying something to the small voice next to it, the scrape of a chair leg on a floor, the ambient texture of a room full of young children, the most common and harmless sound in the entire world, the sound you walk past 100 times in any school in the country and never once register, because there is nothing in the world more normal than children in a classroom in the morning. And it was coming from the chairs, from the empty, tidy, slowly multiplying chairs in their careful arc. There was nothing in them. I was looking directly at them, in the light, my eyes wide open, and they were empty, every one of them, and the room was full to the ceiling with the sound of 40 children who were not there. The air had gone cold enough to ache in my teeth, and I found that I could not move. I don't mean I was frozen with fear, though I was afraid in a way I have never been before or since. I mean it literally. My feet would not come off the floor. My legs would not answer. It was as though my place in the room had been assigned, and standing still was now the correct and expected thing for me to do, and some part of me below thinking had agreed to it. And the sound grew, louder and somehow warmer, closer, not in front of me anymore, but all around me, on every side, the way a sound surrounds you when you're inside the room it's coming from rather than outside it. And the chairs in the arc began very slightly to settle, to give, each one in its turn dipping a fraction of an inch the way a cushion dips when a small weight comes down onto it, one after another around the half circle, settled. The precise soft sequence of a class finding its places and going quiet and folding its hands and getting ready for the day to begin. And a voice, an adult woman's voice, warm and bright and patient and very, very close, just behind my left shoulder, near enough that I should have felt the breath of it, said, "There you are. We've been waiting. Find your seat." That broke whatever was holding me. The assignment, the agreement, whatever it was, it snapped, and my legs came back and I was out the door of 214 and down the east stairwell 2 steps at a time and through the front doors and out into the parking lot, standing in the cold October dark with my hands on my knees, breathing like I'd sprinted a mile. Behind me, the school sat exactly as it always had, dark, quiet, 3 stories of ordinary brown brick, every window black, nothing moving anywhere in it. The only sounds were the wind moving the dead weeds and the blood going in my own ears. I did not go back inside. I missed the 4 a.m. patrol and the 6 a.m. patrol, the only 2 I ever missed in all my nights there, and I sat in the cabin with the door locked, which was absurd, locking a fiberglass door against a building, and I watched the one live feed of the front entrance, and I waited for something to come walking out of those double doors. Nothing did. The doors stayed shut. When the sky finally went grey, and then pale, and then ordinary morning blue, I got in my car and drove home. And that morning, for the first time, when I called the check-in number, the line did not behave the way it always had. I dialed it to log my departure, the way the binder said to. 2 rings. The recorded woman. Site is acknowledged. Maintain presence. Thank you. The tone. And then instead of the dead air that always followed the tone, a pause. A small click, like a call being patched through, like a switchboard connecting. And then a real voice, a living one. The flat administrative man. The one who'd hired me in 9 minutes and never given his name. "You stayed inside too long," he said. It wasn't a question, he knew. 3 of the 4 cameras in that cabin were dead, and had been dead since before I started, and he knew exactly what I'd done anyway, and there was nothing surprised in his voice and nothing angry. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had made this exact phone call before, to other people, and knew precisely how the next few minutes would go. "You're all right," he said, before I'd managed to say anything at all. "You left in time. As long as you didn't sit down, you're all right." "Did you sit down?" "No," I said. My voice came out wrong. "Did you find your seat?" The phrase went through me like cold water down the spine. The exact words the voice behind my shoulder had used. He hadn't been in that room. He couldn't have heard it, and he'd said it back to me like a man reading the next line off a checklist. "No," I said. "Good." I heard him let out a long breath on the other end of the line. "Then you're all right. Don't do that again. Don't go over 4 minutes, ever, for any reason. The rules are the rules for a reason, and I'd have thought that was getting obvious to you by now." And then I asked him the question I'd been carrying around in my chest since November, the one I'd been afraid to say out loud because saying it made it real. I asked him what was in there. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I thought the line had dropped. And then he said the thing I have turned over in my mind every single day since. "It isn't a what," he said. "It's a when. The school never closed. The closing was only ever on paper. They emptied the building and they signed the documents and they put up the fence, and as far as the county and the lawyers and the maps are concerned, the place has been shut for 20 years. But the school didn't agree to any of that. Nobody asked the school. And a school, son, a school is not a building. A building is just where it lives. A school is a routine. It's a thing that happens at set times, in a set order over and over, with hundreds of children, day after day, year after year, for decades. And if you do anything that faithfully, that repetitively, in one place for long enough, the place learns it. The place takes it on. And then, even when the children stop coming, and the place keeps doing it, because that's what it is now. That's all it is. The bell still rings in there every morning. You just can't hear it from the cabin. The pledge still gets said. Roll is still called first thing every day." He paused. "And it would very much like its numbers to be full." I said the only thing a sane man could say. I said that didn't make sense, that there were no children, that the kids who'd gone to that school were grown now, in their 30s and 40s, scattered across the country living their own lives, that there was no one left to fill those chairs. "Most of them," he agreed quietly. "Most of them grew up and got out and never thought about the place again. Most of them." And then, gently, almost kindly, the way you'd correct a child who'd gotten a simple sum wrong, he said, "Where do you think the chairs come from?" I want to be careful, here near the end, about how much I claim to understand, because the truth is I understand almost none of it. And I've come to believe the not understanding is the only reason I'm still able to sit here and tell it. He told me I could keep the job if I wanted it. "Most guards quit after a night like the one I'd had," he said, "and there was no shame in that, and the final check would be mailed either way. But the ones who stayed, the ones who went back to following the rules exactly, were never troubled again. Because the school," he explained, "does not want the guards. The guards are wrong for it. We arrive at the wrong hour, after the day in there is done. We walk the wrong paths, the staff arteries, the service halls, the edges the routine never uses. We keep moving, and we never sit, and so we never take a place, and the school never learns to expect us, never counts us, never recognizes us as belonging to it. We were furniture to it, maintenance, beneath its notice. The danger had only ever been in making myself part of the day, in arriving while class was somehow in session, in walking into a classroom, in standing still long enough to be accounted for, in taking a seat. The danger was in being counted. I stayed 11 more weeks. I'll be honest about why. I needed the money still, the same as before. But it was more than that by then. I had crossed some line in myself where I needed to keep watching. The way you can't stop pressing a bruise. I followed the rules to the letter every night. Never more than 4 minutes in any room. Never once still. I walked my clean lit figure 8 along the edges of a building that was, somewhere in its center, holding a school day I would never see. And nothing ever reached for me again. The man had told the truth about that at least. But I kept the log. I never stopped. I copied the menu every night and counted the chairs and wrote down everything that changed, dated and initialed, and the changes never stopped coming. The menu cycled steadily forward through the weeks, then the months, a whole year's worth of lunches, then into a second year, always in correct order, always current, always the meal that came next. The chair count in 214 climbed all the way into the low 20s, and then one night I came in and it had dropped all at once back down to a dozen, and I never learned what that meant, and I have decided I am glad I never will. Some nights I'd hear the bell faintly, very far inside, where the man said I'd never hear it. Some nights the recorded woman on the phone said thank you a half second too late. And then, on a night in February, I came in for the midnight check-in, and there was a new sheet of paper thumbtacked to the cafeteria corkboard, right beside the menu, an attendance list, names typed in a neat single column, last name first, the format a teacher reads down first thing in the morning to see who showed up and who didn't. I didn't recognize a single one of them, except the last name on the list. The last name was mine, first and last, spelled correctly, exactly the way it's spelled on a security badge I never sent them a photograph for. I quit the next morning. The flat man didn't argue, didn't try to talk me out of it, didn't sound surprised. He thanked me for my service in that worn, smooth voice and gave me an address to send the equipment and another to receive the final check. And then, just as I was about to hang up, almost as an afterthought, the way you'd remind someone to grab their umbrella, he said, "You'll want to take your name off, by the way, off the badge, off the paperwork, anything you signed for us, get rid of it. That's how it knows who's enrolled." I burned the badge and the lanyard that same morning in an old coffee can in the corner of my apartment building's parking lot, and I stood over it until the laminate had curled and blackened and there was nothing left of my photographed face. I put the binder through a shredder, every page, and bagged the strips and put them in 3 different dumpsters across town, which I know was insane and which I did anyway. I never sent them a forwarding address. The final check never came. I decided I didn't want it. That was 4 years ago now. I sleep fine mostly. The job is behind me. I have a different life, smaller and quieter, and I almost never think about that building during the ordinary run of the year. But twice a year, at the very start of September and again at the very start of January, the 2 points where a school year breaks and begins again, I get a feeling in the late afternoon, around 2:30 or 3 o'clock. The hour when the last bell would ring and the children would file out the front doors and down those 4 concrete steps past the bent handrail. It's a pull, a small, low, physical pull, somewhere behind my breastbone. The feeling that I've forgotten something, that there is somewhere I am supposed to be and I'm late and they're waiting on me. It lasts about a minute and then it fades and I get on with my evening. It isn't strong. I can resist it easily. I always have, but it comes twice a year, regular as a school term, and it has not faded with the time the way the man on the phone promised me it would. If anything, it has gotten a little clearer each year, a little more specific, a little more like a place I can almost picture. And this past January, sitting at my own kitchen table at 3 in the afternoon with that small, soft tug behind my breastbone, I could have sworn, and I know exactly how this sounds. I know precisely what kind of man it makes me sound like. That underneath the pull, very faint and very far away, the way a sound comes to you through a closed classroom door from somewhere down the hall, I heard a woman's voice, warm, patient, unhurried, reading down a list of names, and it had not yet gotten to mine.